Welcome in, gentlemen. Excited to keep it rolling this week at the Valspar. Let's get it started with your best bets. And Spencer, we'll get it going with you first. Who you got?
So I'm going to go to the Bet365 top 20 portion of the market, and I'm going to take Steven Yeager at plus 280 this week.
All right. So Spencer's taking a shot on Yeager. What about you, Nick?
Absolutely love that play. I'm a Jaeger guy as well this week, but I'm going to go back to the well with a guy that keeps breaking my heart, Will Gordon, top 40 at plus 130.
Okay. Well, Gordon is someone we're going to have a discussion on later.
Okay.
I'm getting ugly this week with some of my plays. I'm going to go with Kevin Roy, top 40 plus 400 as my best this week.
That was going to be my other one. So
No
I'm glad
way.
you went with that. Yeah, that's my boy. I love Kevin Roy.
All right. Well, Spencer, let's jump into your best bet first. Why are you going with Steven Yeager top 20?
So Yeager's a golfer that's experiencing massive win equity in my model when I run this tournament for upside. It's one of the reasons I decided to also bet on him to come top 10, top 5, and to win the event. But it was the recalculated strokes gain totals that my model uncovered to mimic this course that intrigued me most. So I always talk about this, but my baseline outputs on a generic course had him 29th in this field in expected production. We saw that jump to 8th when recalculating the data for this specific event. I think when you add that to his top 20 returns for total driving, par 3 average, a couple other things that came into the mix, it's easy to understand why my data believes Yeager might be the best long shot on the board if you're shooting for the moon and trying to locate the eventual winner from outside of 50-1. Now, the thing with that is for a top 20, we don't necessarily need all that upside, but this is my preferred way to back him. Like Nick and I were talking about this earlier. There's some semblance of an opportunity to try to back him in the top 40 market, on maybe about like plus 110, depending on where you find it. But I think betting for the pure upside on a lot of these plays this week is actually my preferred route to go, just because of the floor that's presented mixed with the upside that I believe that Yeager has. Like I'm going to shoot for the moon on it.
All right. And with not a ton of elite players in the field this week, those elite players also aren't in the best form. So who knows? This could be the week where a long shot hits. Nick, what do you think about Will Gordon in the top 40 market this week?
Yeah, just like you said, there's not a lot of elite players in this field. He grades out as a top 20 ball striker. In my numbers overall, I expect him to finish within the top 20 in greens regulation. The downside about his game is something that worries me with the short game around the green, all the strokes that he loses there. If he could just manage that or hit a bunch of greens like my model thinks he will, I think that he's a walking top 40 this week. It's always going to be volatile with him, though. We see him go low, then we shoot him. I think he shot an 80 at the API one round. So it's going to be interesting, but he grades out as one of the best expected ball strikers for me within 150 to 200, with is a distance that my numbers seem to like a lot. Just looking at the course history of Innisbrook and things like that, he can shape the ball in both, fade and a draw. So I think that matters here a lot because it's more of a target golf style golf course. But again, if he could just manage his way around the green and scramble somewhat solidly, I think he'll hit enough greens that he can stay inside the top 40 in this field.
Not a lot of players who are great at everything this week who have palatable numbers. And so that's why I think a lot of us are going to be saying, if this guy can just hang on around the greens or on the putting greens, we'll have a chance this week. And I'm going to echo that by my Kevin Roy top 40 play plus 400. Kevin Roy is a guy who profiles really well this week on approach for me, and specifically over 150 yards and in the longer ranges. He's really solid. Overall, he's 20th in strokes gained approach so far this season. But if you look at a key demarcation of 100 yards, inside 100 yards, he's 173rd in proximity of roughly 225 players on the PGA Tour. But outside of 100 yards, he is 6th on the tour in proximity. So this week, shots are going to be emphasized outside of 150 yards, and specifically in the 175 to 200 yard range. And then there are 5 par 3s this week, which is unique on the PGA Tour. And all of those par 3s are going to be playing at least 195 yards. So I want guys who are really strong on their long irons. And Roy is exactly that. He does rank outside the top 200 in putting strokes gained this year, but I think that's being held down by his first 3 events where he was absolutely horrific. He's bounced back and he's gained strokes on approach in 6 straight track tournaments. A couple of those were courses with tournaments with multiple courses, however, so it didn't necessarily mean he was getting every round. But four of those tournaments, the last four, most far away in time, he missed the cut. But he's made the cut in his last two tournaments, both top 33 finishes, T29 at Honda, T33 in a weaker field at Puerto Rico. But he's got some forward momentum, and he's really strong with the irons. It's not a super strong field, so I'll play him conservatively to finish in the top 40 at plus 400. Don't think he's got a chance to win. Maybe a first round leader bet at some absurd odds might be worth the tiniest of sprinkles, but I like him in the top 40 market. Before we get into any more bets, Spencer, you want to give us a quick breakdown on the course this week?
Yeah, before I even get into the course and exactly what we should be expecting, I do think it's essential to note that while Innisbrook is geologically located in the Sunshine State, the tangible feel of the property should give us a much different style of golf than we've seen over the past few weeks. We will still have that overseeded texture on these greens since we are dealing with dormant Bermuda, but the difference between this venue and other Florida tracks stems from the tree line essence of the layout. We have these 24-yard average fairways and 3-inch thick rough, which might even be a little bit more for this event that will condense the grounds into this compact off the tee test. And we see all that highlighted by the fact that driving length is removed from everyone's repertoire. Golfers are going to be required to work the ball in both directions. And then the reduced layups sneakily add hidden distance to the track that we might not get up front. I hate using this example, and I've been using it every single time this week because I can't exactly figure out how else to explain this, but think of a Pete Dye concept in a non-Pete Dye setting. That's kind of what we get this week with the forced layups and everything that comes into play there. 74 bunkers and numerous water hazards are littered throughout the property. And then it's just one of those venues that demands a complete tee to green skill set for those that find success. That's going to include long iron proximity, good drive percentage, and quality short games. Although there are a lot of quirky stats that I modeled this week that I typically wouldn't in a normal situation. And I'm hoping that that's the differentiator for me of how I built my model compared to some people.
And Spencer, I'll add that, I believe you said 3-inch rough. The tournament people were mad that the rough wasn't as long as they wanted it last year. So I believe they made it
It's
even
like
longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 3/4 inches this week.
Yeah.
So still a significant penalty for missing the fairways. With that in mind, who are your outright plays this week?
So I'm going to take a couple players here, and I want to start this by saying when we look at the win equity choices on this board, and I'm going to give you the top of the board exactly how I have it. I won't give the exact number to save some time, but Justin Thomas, Sam Burns, Jordan Spieth, Matthew Fitzpatrick, Adam Hadwin, and Justin Rose in some order, with Thomas being at the top there. I decided to skip that group and hope that the winner lands elsewhere. So I ended up starting my card on Brian Harman at 40-1. You know, Nick, I know you've been proven right about this almost every week that Harman has no win equity with these performances we have seen. However, it goes back to a statement that I make pretty much every week that oftentimes books over adjust on performances on all ends of the spectrum when we look at recent data. I know the current form looks troubling when we dive into the 2023 season that has yet to yield a top 15 finish, but there are two main points to this argument that I want to make very quickly. So one, it is being priced into the equation here, in my opinion. I don't think we would have gotten a 40-1. And two, most of those venues were not conducive to Harman finding success early in the year. You could probably argue that the Sony Open, maybe the American Express were the stout opportunities that he had. But I almost want to throw all of the recent stuff out the window because those were more driver-friendly tests that were going to emphasize distance in a lot of those West Coast tournaments that he played. I think more of the win equity that we're looking for would be these venues to where driving accuracy matters for him. And maybe you remove some of that short iron proximity from the mix with him, which is where he's been struggling with recently. So I took him at 40-1. I number grabbed this other one on Monday, and this is going to go back to the Steven Yeager thing. I don't want to talk about him too much since I've already given a breakdown on him, but really comes down to the recalculated strokes gain total metric that I ran. I took Taylor Moore at 75-1. That number's also dropped a little bit, but you know, if you're telling me I can still find a number above 50-1 on a golfer that's been trending with 5 top 40 finishes in his past 6 starts, I'm going to bet on those top 15 totals of win play, total driving, and recent strokes gain numbers. And then the last one that I guess this is my Will Gordon, or if you want to say this is my new Webb Simpson, I took Alex Smalley at 100-1. Smalley has regressed some statistically from the expectations my model had for him in the fall. I think everybody knows how aggressive I was touting him earlier in the year. Similar concept with Aaron Wise, which it seems to have gone south there. But the really interesting thing with Smalley that I've noticed is some of the statistics that my model did not like, which would be the par 5 scoring in the around the green play. He's actually been producing better in those stats and worse in the areas that I would be expecting. So if you're telling me that maybe the long iron play, we talked about, over 65% of shots coming from 150 plus yards here. If the around the green play has gone from a total that's outside the top 100 of this field to inside the top 40, I think that combination might actually be conducive for Smalley to find success. And it's just kind of adds to the ball striking to all of that. And if he can make some birdies here, I think that there's more upside that might meet the eye. Get to some of those players that I mentioned when we get to the placement market also, but going to be a reduced card. Like the two names that I wanted to find a way on would have been Justin Thomas, not going to get there at sub 10-1. Adam Hadwin would be the same equation. Maybe those are in tournament wagers that I would be looking for. I did the same thing with Patrick Cantlay last week to where I added him. I kind of feel like I got the raw end of the battle there with it. I thought he struck the ball really well and just never made a putt, but probably do the same thing here with Hadwin and Thomas and go from there.
I was also very intrigued by Hadwin and Thomas and was really disappointed in Hadwin's opening number being so short. Thomas, I didn't expect to get a good number this week, but I believe he's got no finishes outside the top 25 so far this year on tour. So it's been strong for him, even though he hasn't really been in the thick of it in contention. Nick, who you got on your outright card this week besides Stephen Yeager?
I went with Wyndham Clark, going back to the well on Wyndham Clark, and KH Lee is someone I'm going to buy low on. I think this course fits the KH Lee that we're used to backing perfectly, but his form obviously has been a little bit sketchy. So I think that's why we see an inflated number on KH Lee. I also like Robbie Shelton at 90-1. Shelton, I believe, has finished inside the top 20 in 2 out of his last 4 events. He grades out extremely well for those long irons that I'm looking for. Will Gordon, same thing. I don't need to talk about him, but my favorite outright bet this week is Stephen Yeager. Spencer already talked about him a bunch, so I don't really want to steal a thunder. But really was interested in Justin Rose. If I was looking for someone a little shorter, I couldn't find a number that I liked. I would have liked to get the opening number, I believe. Some of the books out there open 27-1. That is long gone. I missed it. So in terms of live betting someone I'm looking to grab, I think this is a perfect course for Justin Rose in a field that I think he could certainly win. If Justin Thomas doesn't walk away with it, which my numbers seem to think that he's by far the best golfer in this field as well.
We've talked about Jason Day at length in this podcast, as well as Ricky Fowler, but Justin Rose, another guy who has a major championship, an elite player on the tour for a lot of the 2010s, who's really resurging. I believe he also was number 1 in the world, already has a win this year, and maybe he keeps going with another weaker field this week. I'm going to go also with Spencer's guy, Taylor Moore. He's out there at 70-1 on Bet365. Spencer touched on a lot of the reasons why I like him. His putter's his biggest strength also, which we've seen Bermuda Burns come through with his strong putter on this course the last 2 years. But Taylor Moore also, we mentioned Adam Hadwin as a player who's won at this event and a player that we're interested in this week, probably in the live market. Taylor Moore profiles very similarly to Adam Hadwin before Hadwin won this event in 2017. I know Nick and Spencer, you guys have talked about looking at the guys who won this event and their form before this event. And I thought there were a lot of similarities between Hadwin in 2017 and Moore now. So I'm going to play him in that market. I'm not playing him in any other markets. I've also got Justin Suh. I can't quit it with Justin Suh. I bet him top 40 was my best bet last week. He finished T6. Also had a little bit of an escalator on him. So I got a little bit Justin Suh money. And I like this guy a lot. 37-1 right now out there on Bet365. And he's got 11 straight made cuts. He's gained on approach in 5 straight events. Around the green is his biggest weakness, but he gained 1.3 strokes around the green last week at a really tough place to be positive in strokes gained around the green at a significant number. And if that's his biggest weakness, maybe he can keep it going this week. And Spencer, you mentioned this is kind of a Pete Dye-esque course and non-Pete Dye surroundings. And he's an elite player on the greens we mentioned, but his length is the one issue for Suh, but this week that's not as much of an issue. So I'm going to take a chance on a guy who I think has higher upside than a lot of his peers in that higher 30s to 1 territory this week in the outright market. So just those two plays for me, but we'll let it ride. Guys, any thoughts on each other's outright plays that we like or don't like?
I do want to mention on Suh for a second, just because I'm looking at my numbers right here. So this is just taking the players that are in the field this week. He's 116th in strokes gained around the green. That's kind of what you were alluding to a second ago, Roberto. But, for whatever it's worth, over his last 24 rounds, he's jumped up to 47th in this field. I think if you're telling me that he can be a top 50 around the green player with the way that he is able to putt, I think his putting acumen, I would not be shocked. And this is like a very big statement I'm going to make. I would not be shocked if Justin Suh within the next 5 years leads the PGA Tour in strokes gained putting one of these seasons. I think he's that sort of an elite player, specifically from distance. Like I've made the example before that he reminds me a lot of Jordan Spieth from outside of 20, 25 feet, to where he runs or walks in these putts better than most players there. And kind of like you talked about, Roberto, if you remove length from the equation on a course, obviously becomes much more upside driven in these events. And, there's a reason why he was the most heralded Korn Ferry player coming into this season in a lot of people's books. And I don't know if we necessarily got that upside from him over the first couple of months, but we're certainly getting it now with not only made cuts, but also he's competing in these tournaments. So I couldn't get there on him, but I also think there's a lot of safety that he possesses with some unknown upside. And that always intrigues me from an outright perspective when we don't know what some of these kids are going to mature into with their games. And I mean, if you tell me Justin Suh was to win this event, I wouldn't be shocked, even though it's not a ticket that I punched.
And so I'll kick off our placement market bets right here with Justin Suh. I logged this in my notes yesterday. Justin Suh on the Bet365 player market bets, 40th or better at -120, but that's moved all the way to 38th or better. So I did find a top 40 on another book at -125. So you can either play that or the top 30 or 38th or better at -120, whichever one you feel better about or have access to. As you mentioned, I feel like that putter gives him a really high floor. And even though the around the green numbers aren't great, the putter can bail him out in certain instances as well. So I think it kind of works in his favor there.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I think anytime that you can put a putter in his hand, he's going to obviously exude more upside than we would see on a given week with it. So I mean, I think it's an intriguing bet.
Spencer, any other player market bets that you have this week?
So I kind of stuck to Bet365 exclusive in the way I did it. I've been giving a lot of top 40 plays recently, and I'm not so sure. That's not how I got into the space doing it. Like one of the ways that I used to do it is I would bet top 20s. I would try to bet a little bit more on the upside that I was getting. I didn't like how I kept finding myself in these positions, and I've been profitable doing it the last 2 years. Like I don't want to say that this has been bad, but kind of with these markets becoming more difficult to beat, I didn't want to keep finding myself in these positions to where I was taking these +135, +140 plays on players like Taylor Montgomery to come top 40, and then watching him shoot 7 over the last 4 holes to lose that bet. So I decided to bet a little bit more on the upside of all these players that I took. And every single one of these wagers that I'm going to mention can be found on Bet365. But obviously Jaeger, like I talked about, at +280. I took Taylor Moore at +320, Nick Taylor at +333, Tyler Duncan +333, and then Alex Smalley +400. Once again, those are going to all be top 20 bets. And then I moved it a little bit more up the market in some of these bets. So I took Jaeger at 6-1 to come top 10, Taylor Moore 7.5-1 to come top 10, and Alex Smalley 9-1 to come top 10. And then I rounded it out with Jaeger at 12-1 and Moore at 16-1 to come top 5. It's just going to be a really heavy card for me this week with Jaeger and Moore. Obviously, if one of those two guys can get themselves into contention or win this tournament, now all of a sudden we're talking about, 12, 13, 14, 15 unit sort of weeks here with really at the end of the day, very minimal risk that I'm taking on, but I'm going to go that route here. I highly considered Robbie Shelton to come top 40. I think Nick Taylor maybe is a little bit more volatile than I wanted to come top 20. And then the other bet that I looked at was Brian Harmon to come top 20. I don't know. I didn't get there on any of those other plays, but I think there's some intriguing placement bets out there.
I like it. A full card from you, a lot that you like in some of those escalators. So I think it's a
Yeah.
good week to go with upside, especially with the lack of elite players playing near their ceilings. Nick, how about you this week?
I love Spencer's card. I just want to say that I think it's going to be a monster week for him. It hasn't been the year that we both wanted so far to start the year. I think this is when Spencer goes absolutely nuts. So I'm tailing all of those plays. I love everything with Jaeger. Taylor Moore, I believe Spencer was nice enough to trade to me in season-long fantasy, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I did punch a ticket on Robbie Shelton, top 40. I got plus 140 there. I think that number's still out there. I took a little bit of a dart throw on Henrik Norlander. I think this is a course that he can manage his way around to finish top 40 at plus 240. And then Roberto, I'm with you, buddy, on Kevin Roy 4-1. I think that's as long as he just can hit greens and hit fairways, that's what we need out of him. He's been doing it every single week for the past 7 weeks, so I don't see it stopping now. And then obviously my boy Will Gordon, I will go down with the ship until further notice. But yeah, other than that, I just love Spencer's card. I'm excited for Taylor Moore and our boy Jagerbaum here.
All right. Well, I'm glad that you guys are both on Taylor Moore and Nick, you're on Kevin Roy, because I've got my sleepers article coming out and I already wrote up my part on Taylor Moore and I'm finishing it up on Kevin Roy.
Love that.
I also did bet Taylor Moore 7-1 top 10 at Bet365. Forgot to mention that one earlier. But outside of that, Kevin Roy and Justin Suh top 40 are my other placement market bets. Spencer, your bread and butter is the tournament long matchups. Do you have any plays in that space this week?
So I'm going to do something that you never see from me, since these head-to-head matchups are not probably what they've been in years past. Mm-hmm. Shops on the legal front are incredibly aware of who they are putting against each other. It doesn't mean we can't find a bit of value here and there, but the 20-point threshold that I look for to recommend these plays on podcasts or even inside my articles are kind of preventing more of a headache than we have become accustomed to yearly. It has worked okay from a pre-tournament perspective. I believe I'm 9-1 this year on those plays. Like, that's obviously great, but we're talking about 10 bets through. I mean, I don't know how many tournaments we're at this point. So only about a bet per week is actually making its way onto these cards. And, you know, I always talk about finding opponents to take on versus ones that I'm trying to back, but the fade candidates aren't necessarily producing much wiggle room from the way that I ran it. So if we look at the best names on the board for options that I would have wanted to oppose, and I'm going to list these because I actually think it's important for everybody listening out there. Maybe at one of your shops, you can find one of these matchups and go about it that way. Just want to get these names on of being golfers that I'm trying to take on. This would be the top 10 in order: Kevin Kisner, Eric Van Rooyen, Carson Young, Garrick Higgo, Chad Ramey, Cameron Champ, Troy Merritt, David Lingmerth. As you can tell, there's a lot of players who performed last week that my model kind of wanted to take on. Gary Woodland. And then, I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this, Webb Simpson graded inside the bottom 10 candidates for me.
Yes.
I will very quickly move past that last name, since nobody wants to hear Webb fades on this podcast. I don't know who's editing this. Sophia, Noah, Matt. Feel free to insert past audio of me saying Webb is the greatest golfer in the world, or whatever that gets past that asinine comment that I just made. But the problem with everything I just mentioned would be that Van Rooyen, Young, Ramey, Champ, Lingmerth, Merritt, they don't even have bets on the legal side of the equation that you can take on. That's a problem. You can't fade someone that isn't being offered. On the flip side of the equation, you look at Garrick Higgo and Gary Woodland. I've probably lost 5 or 6 units trying to take on those two golfers over the past 3 or 4 events. I'm kind of just willing to chalk it up that my numbers might be a little bit behind the 2-year perspective that I run things. I'm not going to keep putting dead money into wagers. And then if we look at Kisner and Simpson, it's where the problem even exudes further out there. We can find matchups of, you know, Kevin Streelman minus 150 over Kisner, Nick Taylor minus 158 over Webb. Regardless of what I think about those players, we've kind of been priced out of the market there. So that's the long answer to go back to the one bet that I'm going to make this week is Justin Thomas minus 120 over Jordan Spieth. I very, very rarely play star versus star. I think you are asking for problems when you do this. My model doesn't even necessarily believe that Jordan Spieth is not a golfer that's going to perform this week. He's top 5 in my model, how I ran it. Here is where I am going with this. Justin Thomas is so by far and away, with the way I ran my numbers, the favorite to win this event. It has safety on him. Like you talked about, Roberto, he really hasn't even been as bad as the public perceives him to be. And I'm going to try to get exposure to him. I can't get it in the outright market like I wanted to. But if you're telling me that I can get a reasonable price against Jordan Spieth, it's not the minus 160s that are out there against Matthew Fitzpatrick. I would rather try to find exposure on Thomas, kind of buck my conventional wisdom that I like to take of finding a matchup or opponent that I want to fade, and bet a golfer that I actually wanted to take on. Not something that I normally do. I just think it's a price that's off by about 20 points. And really in a market where there's not too many head-to-head matchups that I wanted, that was the one doable one that made sense to me.
You mentioned a lot of the players that you wanted to take on just weren't available, or they were available at juiced prices. One of the things that I really like doing on this podcast is giving out the player market bets where we fade a player to finish X position or worse. Yeah. And a lot of the guys that you mentioned, I was searching while you were saying their names, and other ones I'd already looked up myself trying to fade them in that market. There just is no X position or worse available even to bet them on. We mentioned one a few weeks ago that we both really liked that didn't hit on Luke Donald at the Genesis, I believe, or actually no, maybe API. And he's not even available this week. Like I would have shoved some more money on the over the counter again to fade him again to miss the cut, but not an option this week, and that's pretty frustrating. But I like the JT over Spieth play. JT hasn't putted well. Everybody knows this, and I think he's on his 3rd putter already in the new year this week. So if he can just get that together, obviously there's way more upside, but his floor is a lot higher than Jordan Spieth's. And as everybody knows, Jordan Spieth was a Marine's knee away from not making the weekend last week. So
yeah,
Jordan Spieth, you never know what you're going to get. It's going to be awesome watching him on PGA Tour Live, featured and marquee groups as it is every week with Jordan Spieth. But the roller coaster ride will continue. There's no doubt about that. And I think Justin Thomas has an edge there as well. So I like that play.
Yeah, it just comes down to a number grab at the end of the day, more than anything else. Like I'm not like actively looking to take on Jordan Spieth. I think there's a lot of reasons to like him, but he's a volatile golfer. And if we're saying both players are shaky with the putter at times, which I think is a fair statement, like Spieth's not a given to make some 5-foot putts, specifically on fast greens. So I love the ball striking that I've seen from Thomas recently. And I think like, we've talked about it a lot on this show, and unfortunately, it never maturated to, or at least for me, I don't want to speak for you guys, to really getting profit from it. How many times did we talk about Scotty Scheffler during the fall that Scotty Scheffler's going to win? He's going to win as soon as a putt goes in. Look, he lost strokes putting last week, and he still won the tournament. And I don't know if I necessarily expect that from Thomas, but there's going to be a week that the putter is just average. And I think when the putter's averaged, he might win one of these events very soon.
I agree with those statements. I also wanted to ask you guys, one of the players you mentioned, Spencer, that you wanted to take on or were looking to take on your top 10 is available in the Bet365 player markets. And that is Webb Simpson, 57 or better at minus 120 or 58 or better minus 120. If you had to choose one or the world and get it right or the world ends, which one would you guys choose? Nick, I'll start with you.
I'll take the other side. I think he's just washed.
Spencer?
I'll say that he finishes. I'll say he finishes on the worst side of the equation here. I would probably, like in an ideal situation, would prefer a head-to-head matchup, but as we've kind of talked about, there's just nothing out there. So look, I don't hate it. Like I kind of lean towards him missing the cut if you made me force a decision here on it. It's not that he's so far off on my model, but like where he is off is the projected price point versus, I guess, my actual price point for him. Like it has him as a 50-50 fringe guy to make this cut. And I don't necessarily think the market has him priced that way in a lot of capacities. Maybe in the matchup sense of it, like obviously Nick Taylor being minus 158 against him is a really large number. And I think you kind of see some of the downside that might be expected on Webb here, but I'll say that he misses the cut, and that pains me, obviously.
Roberto, real quick, what is your lean? Because the putter has came alive the last 2 rounds. We haven't seen that in a while for him. Around the green, I think it's something you don't really need to worry about. But I just cannot find a way to confidently project what his ball striking is going to be out both off the tee and with his irons, because his irons have gone. His long irons are terrible this season, like the worst they've ever been. His short game's still solid. I don't know. And
I
it
completely
worries me.
echo those sentiments. I looked up this market to specifically see his numbers earlier this week, and when looking into the data, I just was confused. So it's a no bet for me. But if I had,
it's a stay away.
That's
right?
where I lean also. Yes.
Yeah, it's like he does flash. I mean, what he did at the API was fantastic. That's the old web that Spencer fell in love with and was addicted to for the last 10 years. But and then you go see last week at the Players, I think he was a bottom 10 ball striker or both rounds that he was out there, was he not? Yeah, absolutely. If not worse.
You don't want to mess with that kind of stuff either when water comes into play. Like, that's kind of the problem. If you were to tell me on Thursday that Webb was inside the top 10, I believe it from an upside perspective, but I also could see him making the cut and then finishing in dead last place of the people that make the cut. Like, I think that's a real trajectory that he could take this week. So I'm not going to necessarily, I wanted a head-to-head matchup against an opponent that I was hoping I liked. Without that being out there, it's just probably a stay away in all capacities of Webb this week.
Before we give you guys any more Webb Simpson than you can handle, here's a reminder that the Links and Locks podcast is proudly presented by Bet365, the world's favorite sportsbook brand. Sign up with promo code ACTION to get Bet365's exclusive sign-up offer in New Jersey and Colorado. Bet $1, get $200 free. What more would you want $200 free for than the Valspar Championship this week? I can't imagine there's any other sporting event that's going on that would attract your interest. Guys, any other final plays before we get to the rapid fire round?
No, not for me. Like, I do have a bulky card in the placement market. Everything else is kind of condensed for me, but it's going to be another one of those spots. I will be looking to take on some in-tournament head-to-head plays. I don't have anything specifically right now. I'm still waiting for markets to release, but if I do find anything, it will be in my Action Network article tomorrow for round 1.
Awesome. Nick, how about you?
Let's fire away. I'm in.
All right. So this is from an outright perspective. Whom you'd rather have, player A or player B, to win the tournament? Let's get it started with Jordan Spieth versus Matt Fitzpatrick. Nick, you first.
Fitz.
Spencer?
I will say Jordan Spieth after everything I said. I just think there's still a lot of upside with him if it hits.
Sam Burns or Adam Hadwin? Nick?
Ooh. I'm going to go Sam Burns. I get why people like Adam Hadwin, but it's still Sam Burns, and showed a little bit last week. Obviously, he's extremely comfortable at this venue, but his form coming into this tournament the past 2 years is, tenfold what it is right now. But I'm not going to just fall in love with Adam Hadwin on it. And it seems like everybody at the John Deere last year, too, when it was Webb and Adam Hadwin were the 2 best players, and they both sucked that week. Like, just because he's a one of the top names in this event, I'm not going to fall in love. I'll take talent all day with Sam Burns.
I love that you paired these two together. I actually think that Hadwin is not that far off from this mix, and that's one of the reasons why I'm hoping to try to find a live ad on him. But I agree with everything that Nick just said. Sam Burns is probably, at least by my math, the second choice to win this tournament, if not the third choice. So I'm going to still trust that at the end of the day, and he is the back-to-back champion.
Let's go with the guy who we've picked a winner on this podcast this year versus a guy who's never won on the PGA Tour. Keegan Bradley or Tommy Fleetwood? Nick?
Fleetwood. I'm always picking Fleetwood. It seems like the public absolutely loves Keegan Bradley, but what I'm seeing from bookmakers that I respect, Fleetwood's hanging on, and I think his iron play, especially of late, has been on fire. He's a great short game player too, so I think what Innisbrook did to kind of take down some of that fringe right around the green to make it that extra long rough that you guys talked about earlier, I think that's advantage Tommy Fleetwood. And there is water on the back 9, so I don't need to say anything about Keegan Bradley there. I'm going to take Tommy Fleetwood, but I am a homer and I am a fanboy of Tommy Fleetwood.
Spencer?
I'll say Keegan Bradley. I think anytime you give him fast screens, we get a little bit more upside, and you have to love the weighted proximity numbers for him.
Let's go with Davis Riley versus Denny McCarthy. Nick?
Oh, God. Pass. Can I pass? So for
You
Davis
don't like
Riley,
them, or
I
you
know
like
he's-
them both?
I don't like either of them. Denny, anytime that ball striking is, I mean, he's going to be accurate off the tee, but I hate his iron play. Davis Riley last year, he finished tied, I think, solo second, did he not? And especially on the DFS side too, we don't need to talk about that, but it seems like everybody is into Davis Riley. He's shorter than 40-1 at some sports books, which is bizarre to me, but he is a terrible short game player and had the short game weekend of his life at Innisbrook last year. I think with the course changes too, that's something that goes against him. I'm going to call that an outlier week. I will go with Denny McCarthy because he's, these are undulated greens. So they're short greens, so you probably, or small greens, probably won't see a ton of three putts, but give me the guy who's, could get the hottest putter on the planet with any player on the PGA Tour. I'll take Denny.
I'm pretty much completely out on Davis Riley this week in any facet of how you want to look at this, whether this is matchup bets or outrights or whatever market you want to go to. It doesn't matter. I'm out. I don't know what McCarthy's upside ever is, but I think he's an intriguing play this week because of the putter. And I also think he adds a nice mixture of safety to the mix that you don't get with a lot of these guys. And obviously we're talking about who can win the golf tournament, but when the winning score is, like, in my opinion, it's not going to be 17 under par. I think they've made a concerted effort that this is going to be more difficult, more like it's played in years past. I don't know if that means it's 8 under. I don't know if that means it's 12 under, but sounds like the type of tournament Denny McCarthy could win because of that safety if you tell me he gets to 11 under par.
I had him last week on a bet that I made in February that I'd almost forgotten about. But the putter was on fire for a bit of last week, and he was on the first page of the leaderboard for quite a while as well. Let's do another one with a juxtaposition of styles of play. Gary Woodland or Mav McNeely, guy who can putt and a guy who just cannot putt right now. Nick?
Ooh. Give me Woodland. My numbers like him a lot. I have Woodland. My number spit out 28-1 on Gary Woodland. That is a bit alarming as I did factor in short game a lot, and he is extremely negative there. I'm going to go with Gary Woodland. I can never get Maverick McNeely right, and I'm not going to try to this week.
So my model says Maverick McNeely. That's also a model that runs things from a 2-year perspective. Kind of really like what I've seen from a ball striking perspective with Gary Woodland, that I'm willing to admit that maybe these numbers recently are just a little bit far off from where they should be. So if we're talking about winning the actual golf tournament, look, I mean, Gary Woodland is 12th for me for weighted tee to green. He's number 1 in strokes gain approach over his last 24 rounds. If that's not a style of play that could get hot and win this golf tournament, I don't know what is. So I'm going to kind of buck my model here, and I'm going to say Gary Woodland.
All right, I'm going to give you guys some bigger groups. Just tell me the name you like the most from an outright perspective this week. Ben Griffin, JT Poston, Brandon Wu, Joel Damon. Nick, you first.
Poston, honorable mention, Wu.
Spencer?
That's probably the exact order that I would give to.
Let's go Luke List, Victor Perez, Benny On, and Robbie, or no, we mentioned Benny On. Nate Lashley.
I will go Victor Perez.
It's very close on my numbers between Nate Lashley and Victor Perez. I guess to make it different, I will say Nate Lashley, but it's very close. I like both of them.
Perez, a guy who's done really well on the DP World Tour. Haven't seen a lot of him this year on the PGA Tour. What do you guys like about him?
Nick, you want to go first, Nick?
Yeah, that he knows how to win an event one would be nice for outrights. But I liked him at Augusta last year, and it didn't work out for me. I've kind of been a Victor Perez guy, but I always prefer guys that are sponsored by Ping. That's my brand of choice. But I'm just going with the form, and he's already won this year in a pretty good tournament already. But it was on the DP World Tour. He has not had the success on the PGA Tour like we've talked about. But I'll take Victor Perez, just talent alone. I think he's a much better player than Nate Lashley.
Yeah, it just comes down to the strokes gain total that I ran from a weighted perspective. He's 12th in my model in that capacity. He's 50th when I run it on any generic course. Obviously, I'm not running a ton of stats from him. Like, I don't have a ton of PGA Tour information, but even with the limited sample size that I do have, he graded as a top 20 person in my model. And we don't always see that from the European contingent that gets thrown, or for anybody from any part of the country that kind of comes in on a small sample size here. So I think Perez is an intriguing choice that I trust what we have seen in tournaments that are not really that much weaker than this. If you really look at some of those fields, like you have some quality fields overseas that he has performed well in historically.
All right, last one, guys. From an outright perspective, Bo Hostler, Johnny Vegas, Eric Cole, Tyler Duncan, Will Gordon, and Webb Simpson.
That's pretty easy for me. Will Gordon, but I will go honorable mention Bo Hostler.
Tyler Duncan, he was very, very close to making my card from an outright perspective. I have a first round leader bet on him that I sort of like, and I decided to go that route with it. But I think Duncan has legitimate, let's call it top 20 equity in this event. But if he won this, I would not be shocked. And he's an intriguing play this week. I'll leave it at that.
All right, good stuff, guys. That'll do it for today's episode. And thanks for joining us here at Links and Locks, presented by Bet365. For more great golf content from our Action Network team, check out our Best Bets episode from earlier this week, featuring our own Jason Sobel and the PGA Tour's Ben Everill as they quickly run down their top plays for the Valspar Championship. Be sure to check out actionnetwork.com and the Action app for all of our great golf betting and DFS content. Spencer's going to have his article tomorrow and probably some more later this weekend. I'll have my article out later tonight, which you'll be able to hear once this podcast goes live. You can find Nick on Twitter at SticksPicks. That's Sticks with an X. Nick, where else can we find your work this week?
At Win Daily.
Awesome. Spencer, you can find him at Tee Off Sports. That's TEEOFFSPORTS. Spencer, where else can we find your work this week?
Yeah, so you can find all of the DFS stuff that Nick and I did over at Better Golf Pod. You can find a lot of my written content that I have this week at Rotoballer. You can get my model there. And as you alluded to, Roberto, I do two tournament plays from a weekend perspective of it. I always post a Saturday night article. Whether it's Thursday or Friday, usually just ends up coming down to which board I like better from a head-to-head market. I like to give head-to-head plays for everybody who reads my work if there is something that checks the boxes for me. And then, yeah, I will have the round one play over at Action Network tomorrow also. So be sure to check that out.
Awesome. You can find me at Roberto A213. I'm not doing much else this week. Next week, unclear. We haven't figured out the logistics for the show, but I'll be on PGA Tour Live, so you can catch me on some of those streams for the match play next week. Got to play the course at Austin Country Club just last week, so hopefully we should have some more insights on that coming up, and hopefully we can make the podcast work next week, although I'm not allowed to give out picks. So very excited for next week here in my hometown of Austin, Texas, and hopefully we catch a few winners this week heading into then. So thanks for everyone for tuning in this week. I want to say thanks to everyone who makes this podcast possible, starting with you, the listeners or the viewers on YouTube. And we also want to thank our producers, Noah, Sophia, and Matt. Thanks to Spencer and Nick for joining me this week. And here's to hoping we all hit the green.